Your Excellency, Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, Your Excellency, Dr. S. Jaishankar, Professor Chaturvedi, High Commissioner Shilpak Ambul, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the ministerial session of the 8th Roundtable of the ASEAN-India Network of Think Tanks on the topic Navigating a World in Transition, Agenda for ASEAN-India Cooperation. We are truly honored to have His Excellency Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, Foreign Minister of Singapore, and His Excellency Dr. S. Jaishankar, Honorable External Affairs Minister of India, who will each deliver an address on the significance of ASEAN-India relations during this ministerial session. I wish to extend my sincere thanks to both ministers for making time amidst their very busy schedule to contribute to their insights to this second day of the AINTT Roundtable discussions. Since 2012, the AINTT has provided a valuable platform for policymakers and scholars from ASEAN and India to deliberate on the common economic, geopolitical, and geostrategic challenges facing our two regions. This year's Roundtable's theme aptly highlights that we are currently living in an era of profound and rapid change. This is driven by several factors, including new industrial and technological innovations, instant or rapid virtual and physical connectivity, the impact of a rapidly warming planet, the green transition, and geopolitical contestation, among others. Constant change will bring both opportunities and challenges, and it's up to us to retain our agency and determine how to reshape our economies, our industries, and our societies in response to this. It is also true for both India and ASEAN, and neither of us are immune to these global shifts. ASEAN and India have been steadfast partners since establishing formal engagement as sectoral dialogue partners in 1992. More than 3 decades later, the relations have been advanced to the level of a comprehensive strategic partnership, with collaboration deepening and expanding across all 3 ASEAN community pillars in areas such as education, energy, connectivity, digital economy, maritime security, and maritime connectivity, science and technology, health, and tourism. This year, 2024, marks a decade of India's Act East policy, where ASEAN features as a central pillar of India's regional cooperation. The Act East policy has strengthened ASEAN-India relations across economic, cultural, people-to-people relations, and political security cooperation, with projects funded by the ASEAN-India Fund and the ASEAN-India Green Fund. The newly launched ASEAN-India Fund for Digital Future will further promote collaboration in digital transformation and financial connectivity. These are just a few highlights of the achievements in ASEAN and India's partnership over the last 3 decades. While these are great strides, the sessions of the 8th Roundtable of the AINTT since yesterday morning have also emphasized the untapped potential that remains, especially in the context of this ever-changing world that we find ourselves. A steady hand at the helm is needed to navigate the turbulent geopolitical environment that lies ahead. And more so than ever, ASEAN needs the partnership and cooperation of longtime friends like India at such a time. And I believe that the same is also true the other way around as well. So on this note, I look forward to a fruitful ministerial session, and let us remember that our collective efforts will help ensure that the region remains peaceful, inclusive, and sustainable for us and also for the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Choi. I now have the honor to invite His Excellency Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, Foreign Minister of the Republic of Singapore, to deliver his special address. Your Excellency, sir.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and of course my dear friend Jaishankar, very warm welcome to Singapore and to this session entitled Navigating a World in Transition. I think given the events of the past year and even in the past week, I think you can all agree with me, we are certainly in a world in transition. Having to speak just before Jaishankar is always a challenge, so I took the precaution when I woke up this morning of consulting the only source that has more data than Jaishankar on geostrategic affairs and economics. I'm referring to ChatGPT and Copilot. So I asked a series of questions. I said, take a look back over 2,000 years. What was the peak and when did India and China reach the largest share of global GDP? And the answer is that if you look over 2,000 years, both India and China, but not at the same time, when they were at peace, united, and able to have an integrated economy, both of them were able to achieve a share of global GDP of around 30% and sometimes even more, but not at the same time. Next point is I then asked, list the wars fought between India and China. And I apologize for being so martial so early in the morning, but it gave me a series of 7 or 8. But it was what I noticed was that all these conflicts were basically border skirmishes. I then asked, list the major invasions of India and the route by which these strategic invasions occurred. And in fact, it goes back thousands of years. I think even if you're a South Indian, the first invasion they will talk about is the Aryan invasion, but we'll put that aside. But the point is, all these strategic invasions into India were through the Khyber Pass in the northwest. There, in fact, apart from border skirmishes, there has been never any strategic conflict across the Himalayas or even across the dense jungles of Southeast Asia. Now, why this is relevant is because there is a reason why continental Southeast Asia is called Indochina and why maritime Southeast Asia has also over millennia been deeply influenced by India. Culturally, trade, religion, and to some extent, even the kingdoms and the empires which emerged over centuries in Southeast Asia. So the point here is that the relationship between India and Southeast Asia is a long-standing one, and one which has basically been mediated through a maritime route. And it's worth keeping that in mind. Now, my next series of questions then dealt with economics. Easy question. Who is the 5th largest GDP in the world today? Answer, India. Who's ahead of it? Germany and Japan. But you know that you're within striking range. I think probably by 2027 or thereabouts, it's quite possible to imagine India reaching number 3. I then flipped that question around and asked, which other region of the world has a combined GDP similar to India, and with a population similar to the EU. By that, of course, I'm referring to ASEAN. And it is interesting that even today, ASEAN's cumulative GDP is actually very close to India. And if you think about the subject today, which is a world in transition, and you think in terms of demographics and economic potential, I would put to you one hypothesis that I think that at least for the next 2 decades, major growth is going to occur, economic growth is going to occur in India and in ASEAN. And given our past history, there's much scope for that to be developed in tandem and indeed accelerated. I then turn my questions to trade. So I said, who is ASEAN's largest trading partner? And the answer, China. But you flip the question around. Who is China's largest trading partner? And the answer is that for the last 4 or 5 years, ASEAN has overtaken the EU and the US in terms of total trade with China. So if you ask the Chinese, they will say our largest trading partner is Southeast Asia. Then I flipped my attention to India. Who is India's largest trading partner? And the answer, actually, number 1 is China. Number 2 is the US. And then when I added total trade between ASEAN and India, actually we're in that same ballpark, meaning in excess of 100 billion. But if you drill down those 3 figures, it's probably about 120 billion with China, but you know as well as I do, it is very asymmetrical. India has a large deficit with China. India's trade with the US is on a similar scale as China, but instead of a deficit, India in fact has a slight surplus against the US. You may need to look at that in the coming months. With ASEAN, as I said, it may be surprising to many people, but actually ASEAN-India trade is in the same ballpark as India's trade with the US and China. I think ASEAN may have some surplus, but it's not on the same order of magnitude as China. So anyway, I'm setting all this, my conversations with ChatGPT and Copilot, to set the context for what we are facing and about to the directions which we need to set in the next 20 years. So, where do we go from here? The first point I would add is that if you shift your attention to more modern times, what was most significant for Southeast Asia was when India opened up, economic liberalization post-1991. Since then, India has placed greater attention to Southeast Asia. We've had the Look East policy, which I think was formalized in 1992, and Prime Minister Modi upgraded that to an Act East policy in 2014. And in fact, we've just reached a decade of this Act East policy. I'm very, proud to say that when Singapore was the coordinator of the ASEAN-India relations, we succeeded in upgrading the ASEAN-India relations to a comprehensive strategic partnership in 2022. And Jai, we worked on that together. At the ASEAN-India summit last month, we welcomed the first decade of Prime Minister Modi's Act East policy, and I would like to believe that Jai will agree that ASEAN is a cornerstone of India's foreign policy. These years of increased ASEAN-India engagement have paid off, and in between 2009 to 2023, our two-way trade, in fact, more than doubled, and as I outlined earlier, exceeds $100 billion US dollars. But there's in fact potential to do a lot more because, as I've said earlier, the growth prospects, both demographics and economic, for both India and ASEAN are very positive, certainly for the next 2 or 3 decades. So if we add up our combined population, we have 2 billion people. We have a vast, dynamic, youthful, and forward-looking workforce. And there is both a need and an opportunity to harvest the demographic dividend. Let's now outline a couple of areas where I think we can double down on. First is in the digital space. ASEAN aims to conclude the Digital Economy Framework Agreement by next year, hopefully with India. And we believe India has a role to play in supporting ASEAN's push to become an integrated digital community. In 2022, Singapore and India launched a real-time payment link between Singapore's PayNow system and India's Unified Payments Interface. This was the world's first real-time payment linkage that uses scalable, cloud-based infrastructure and therefore allows it to accommodate future increases in remittance traffic. And believe me, there will be major increases in remittance traffic. But that's not all. That's just bilateral between India and Singapore. India will also be joining phase 4 of the ASEAN's Project Nexus. Project Nexus is basically a project within ASEAN to connect the multiple domestic instant payment systems across the ASEAN network. When India becomes part of that in phase 4, we would achieve an integrated, unified payment infrastructure between India on one hand and Southeast Asia on the other hand. So that's just one example. The next issue is on security and geostrategic dimensions. I would start off by recalling that there were 5 key leaders who in 1961 established the non-aligned movement. It's India, Yugoslavia, Egypt, I think it was Ghana, Nkrumah, and Sukarno in Indonesia. Now, the 2 superpowers in 1961 are clearly very different from 2024. But I would put to you that even in this day and age, when the cast may have altered and the balance may have altered, the original principles behind the non-aligned movement, that for the rest of us who wanted to focus on economic development, on making common cause, on multilateralism, on the rule of law, and not to be forced to pick sides and to align with or against one or the other. Actually, that concept arguably is just as relevant or even more relevant today. And therefore, the attitude that India will take, and maybe even the leadership role in the non-aligned movement of the future, or maybe we should call it non-aligned movement 2.0, will be fascinating and in fact critical. If you consider now to move into the maritime and into the security aspects of the maritime, the first ASEAN-India Defense Ministers informal meeting held in November 23, and I think you will all agree with me, maritime security is of utmost importance to all of us. And Singapore was happy to co-host the ASEAN-India Maritime Exercise in May 23, and I expect these interactions to increase. After all, if for millennia, the primary avenue for Indian interaction with Southeast Asia has been the maritime domain, it makes sense to maintain the serenity and calmness of the sea and the security and access to vital waterways. And on this note, I should add, I would expect India to be a natural partner with Southeast Asia in upholding the primacy of UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. But the third area is that we can do a lot more to build on our historical cultural ties. The Indian Heritage Center in Singapore chronicles the story of the Indian diaspora in Southeast Asia and quite rightly celebrates that rich cultural legacy. But really, if you go across the region, you look at the temples, Angkor Wat, Borobudur, you look at the Thai language and the writing, the influence of Sanskrit, Buddhism, Hinduism, both in modern times and past times. It is obvious that we're building on very deep and strong foundations. The ASEAN-India network of universities is another good start that will promote youth interactions between our two regions. And we're also grateful to the Nalanda University for doubling the number of scholarships for ASEAN students. So let me conclude. This is a time of great transition at the global stage, but this is also a time of great opportunity for India and for ASEAN. Our economic relations, our geostrategic relations, all set us up to double down on our cooperation, on our non-aligned approach, and for standing up for a rules-based approach to greater economic integration between our two regions. And on that note, let me invite my dear friend to fill in and maybe disagree, and then we can have a good, robust Q&A session after this. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
My counterpart and friend, Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, Mr. Jaishankar, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, dear friends. I'm delighted to be with you all today at the 8th Roundtable of the ASEAN-India network of think tanks. And I thank RIS and the ICS Yusuf Ishaq Institute for hosting us today. The theme of our gathering is Navigating a World in Transition, Agenda for the ASEAN-India Partnership. And let us briefly reflect on that subject. The world is always in transition, and nations are perpetually navigating that. But seriously, both terms are relative in their intent. A usage today of the word transition actually is meant to signify the rate of change rather than change itself. And navigation is perhaps more a description of compulsions rather than only of skills. So allow me to dilate on those aspects. The last quarter century has seen many inflection points. Understandably, we focus particularly on major events in big nations. But the more consequential, actually, are the ones which are more universal in their impact. And to my mind, three of them stand out. One is China's entry into the WTO in 2001 that had profound consequences for globalization. The second is the financial crisis of 2008, which heralded a new era of rebalancing. And the third is the COVID pandemic of 2020 that exposed many of our socio-economic vulnerabilities and capacity constraints so starkly. The three are obviously correlated. Now, some other things have also happened in this period. Europe, for example, witnessed Brexit. The United States has reset terms vis-à-vis the world over multiple administrations, terms of engagement vis-à-vis the world over multiple administrations. A conflict in Ukraine has shaken Eurasia out of its strategic complacency. West Asia, or Middle East as some call it, is seeing long-standing issues and fissures exploding beyond expectations. In our own continent, territorial disputes and challenges to international law have become a significant and recurring source of instability. The world has responded in different ways to different challenges in different geographies. In our own, the emergence of the Indo-Pacific and the maturing of the Quad are noteworthy for promoting global good. Now, even growth and progress have shown a double-edged character. On the one hand, they have created prosperity on an unprecedented scale, bringing into being new forces of production, demonstrating the promise of technology, and spurring the proliferation of connectivity. At the same time, we have also seen a leveraging of market shares and economic dependency, the weaponization of international economics, and the strategization of connectivity. Data privacy and cybersecurity have become overriding concerns. The COVID experience, in many ways, was a moment of truth. Since then, the quest for more resilient supply chains, trusted partners, and diversified production have become the crucial global agenda. Whether it is challenges or indeed opportunities, the world today is clearly headed for re-globalization, not deglobalization. That is the transition that we, ASEAN and India, separately and together have to navigate. The quality of our partnership will be influenced by the extent of convergence on all these domains. In the last 3 decades, as you heard from Minister Vivian, we have built up a solid track record of cooperation that has served us both very well. To take it to the next level, we must, however, utilize the changing global situation to our advantage rather than bemoan it as a departure from the norm with which we were all so comfortable. So let me offer some thoughts in that regard. Global manufacturing and supply chains have started to transition. It could be even more so in emerging and critical technologies and the digital chain. Considerations beyond the efficiency of logistics and the costs of products are coming into play. In India, we are seeing both the proliferation of global capability centers and the expansion of manufacturing. To accelerate these trends, the Modi government has announced the establishment of 12 new industrial parks. It has also doubled down on infrastructure building that has made so much progress already in the last decade. Along with that, there is a deepening focus on enhancing the quality of India's talents and skills through vocational training, internships, and expanding the education sector. Each of these could be opportunities for the partnership between ASEAN and India. In visualizing areas of cooperation, we are also targeting new domains and technologies that hold such visible potential. Both India and ASEAN are today more focused on realizing the value of green hydrogen and green ammonia. We are preparing for an era of electric mobility, green shipping, and green steel. Our businesses will have to adjust accordingly. The digital world also opens up new possibilities as we all seek to collaborate to establish more payment platforms, data centers, and semiconductor facilities. The international economy is also contemplating changes that go beyond just technology. The unevenness of the spread of talent and the availability of skills is today actually a very significant concern. It will be felt even more as we enter deeper into the knowledge economy and the requirements of AI. The solutions lie in devising greater mobility, both for human resources and for enterprises themselves. These understandably have socio-political consequences, but will be key to remaining competitive. The increase of global capability centers, which are almost nearing 2,000 now in India, will be a continuing trend. Such mobility can be optimized only if we invest in the training and preparation of skills. This will be increasingly important for our partnership. Connectivity is another domain that merits attention. The post-1945 economic growth centers have naturally created new logistical demands. They are also correcting the distortions and the disruptions of the colonial era. Recent conflicts and extreme climate events have only underlined the case for new connectivity initiatives. Where India is concerned, the trilateral highway to the east, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC, and the International North-South Transport Corridor, INSTC, are major commitments. Understanding their implications is key to exploiting the opportunities they could present. Digital and energy connectivity have also been the subject of recent conversations, especially between India and Singapore. At the end of the day, collaborative connectivity will always be used better and regarded more positively than unilateral ventures. India and ASEAN are major demographies whose emerging demands can not only support each other but become larger productive forces in the international economy. After all, together, we account for more than a quarter of the world's population. Again, as Minister Vivian pointed out, our GDP is similar, and you are among our $100 billion plus trade accounts. Our consumer demands and lifestyle choices are themselves major economic drivers. They will also shape the scale of services and connectivity as we promote trade, tourism, mobility, and education. The magnitude of our endeavors has a resonance that is far beyond the immediate domain. Our collaboration can also be crucial in addressing contemporary challenges. In an era of extreme climate events, ensuring food security is a major concern. Similarly, with the experience of global pandemics, preparing for health security is no less vital. There are lessons even from the recent past on both accounts. There are and there will be political challenges in our shared regions that we will also have to address together. A prime example today is the situation in Myanmar. The interests, and I dare say, perspective of those who are proximate will always be different. We do not have the luxury of distance or indeed of time. This is increasingly the case for HADR situations as well, as also of maritime safety and security. A stronger culture of self-help will only arise by putting our heads and our hands together. The bonding between India and ASEAN is rooted in a deep cultural and civilizational connect. Nurturing that has a value in itself. In recent times, India has contributed to heritage restoration and conservation of art forms. Taking that forward is certainly helpful to promoting deeper people-to-people understanding. So, ladies and gentlemen, the India-ASEAN partnership, now in its fourth decade, holds immense possibilities. We have been an enthusiastic participant in all ASEAN-led forums. Additionally, our bilateral and trilateral engagements have contributed to our closeness. The Mekong-Ganga Cooperation, MGC, and the Indonesia-Malaysia-Thailand Growth Triangle, IMTGT, are making their impact felt as well. As the Indo-Pacific evolves, India has been expressive in its support for ASEAN's centrality and cohesion. We see it as an indispensable pathway as well as a meeting ground. We have been equally clear about respect for international law, rules, and norms. Both in approach and substance, our convergences have only grown over these last 4 decades. As we look ahead, this is a foundation from which we can aspire to higher ambitions. Thank you for your attention.